I'm Alan Gualberto from Philippines, and I want to interview an author just like you.
Okay, happy
So,
to be here.
here are my interview questions. Number one, when did you realize that you wanted to be a writer?
I started writing when I was very young, and I didn't really think of myself as an author necessarily until I published my first book. But I've always kind of been a storyteller, and I started in theater, and then I did film for a while. And then I realized as I was doing film that I wanted to be all of the actors and the director and the composer and all of the pieces. And it turns out that's called being a writer. So now I'm a novelist.
So, let's proceed to number two. How long does it normally take you to write a book?
It takes me generally about a month and a half to get through the first draft. If we're talking the very beginning, typing the first word to publication, that ends up being about a year. Just because of the editing process, the rewriting process, all of the marketing and such that goes into getting a book published with quality versus just writing the end and sending it out into the world.
Number three question. Where do you get your information or ideas for your books?
The main thing I've found that works for me as far as catalyzing the imagination is always learning something new. Whenever I learn something interesting, I always want to write a story about it. I most of the time get that information from podcasts. I have a couple of different podcasts that I listen to, and I have a history podcast and a science podcast that I very much enjoy. And whenever they have an interesting topic, that always gets my imagination going.
So, okay. How old were you when you first write your book? What was the inspiration behind it?
I started writing when I was very young. I published my first book at 24. I've since taken that one down because it's not a very good book, but I mostly had this concept in my head and I wanted to see it on the page. I think it was Beverly Cleary who said, if you don't see the book you want to read on the shelf, write it. And that's basically what I ended up doing.
Number 5. What was one of the most surprising things you learned in creating your books?
I would have to say I learned a fair amount about myself. A lot of writing ends up being a self-discovery in a way. And as far as not self-oriented, it was interesting to see how people reacted to my writing. It was like, this is something I've spent a lot of time and I've put a lot of energy and focus into. And some people were just like, great. And some people were like, oh yes, this is fantastic, and throw a party and all of that. It was interesting to learn which people around me had which kinds of reactions.
Number 6. How many books have you written? Which is your favorite?
I've written a little more than a dozen manuscripts so far. My first publication was actually 3 books in one because it was cheaper for me to do that way. And I've since taken that one down. So I have 4 books on the market right now. I have 3 that we are ramping up to launch throughout the summer. It's a whole series, so they kind of have to be launched all at once. And then I have, I think, 4 more in the arsenal. So that's what, 14? Around there. As far as which one's my favorite, that's kind of like asking what your favorite kid is. I mean, they're all very different. They're all very dear to me because a lot of myself went into them. but I don't know if I can choose a favorite.
So, sorry. What do you think makes a good story?
I think a lot of authors lose sight of what a story is, and as far as setting the standard for a good story, it being a story is a great start. I do some judging for writing competitions and that sort of thing, some editing on my spare time. And something that I find a lot is people have a concept, but they don't have a story. And a story is a problem and a solution. So when you don't have one or the other, and you don't start with the problem, you don't end with the solution, then you don't have a story. So long as you have an actual story and not just word vomit, then you're on the right track, definitely.
Do you try more to be original or to deliver to readers what they want?
It's sort of a strange question because I think readers want originality, but when you try to be original, that's when you're at your least original. So if you're trying to be unique and interesting, then you're going to lose sight of the joy of storytelling, I think, in a way. And you're going to, people like this, and people like this, well, let's put them in my story together. You start writing for someone else instead of writing for yourself, and then it's never going to be good, and it ends up being very tropish and cliche. If you write for yourself, you end up writing what people want to read.
Do you
So
think?
I guess to answer the question, I am more in entertainment than art, so I am more likely to deliver readers what they want to read, but that's because I want to read it, you know?
Yeah. Do you think someone could be a writer if they don't feel emotions strongly?
Well, I hope so, because I do not feel emotions to the same extent that a lot of other author friends of mine do. I have a very analytical approach, and the author that I've been reading a lot of lately has basically zero emotion spelled out. It's all implied in his stories. It's a very dry kind of writing. And he's multi-million all across the planet, lots of books everywhere. So it's definitely possible.
If you could tell your younger writing self anything, what would it be?
I have a mantra that I have since adopted, and you'll hear me say it throughout this and anytime you hear me speak, and that is to write selfishly. So if you do write selfishly, then you will end up writing good works. And I think a lot of younger me didn't give me permission to write because what if my mom reads it, or what if my grandma reads it? All of these fears that I can't write what I want because of other people might judge me for it. So I've since gotten over it because my mom doesn't read it anyway. But if I could tell my younger self something, it would be write selfishly, write for yourself, not for anyone else's expectations.
Number 11. How did publishing your first book change your process of writing?
It was an interesting moment for me because until then, I could always go back and change my writing. Like, if I didn't like this scene or I learned something new and I want to integrate here, publishing the book gave me the freedom to kind of let it go and work on another project and just kind of be done with it. And I had to give myself permission to be okay with it being bad because writing more is what gets you better. So it wasn't till after I had written about 10 manuscripts that I even really started pursuing publishing. And by my 5th book or so, that's when I found my voice as an author. So going back and editing those again it made more sense because I could do it with my voice as an author instead of my fumbling around and trying to tell a story, which is what most of my first few books were.
So, number 12. How do you balance making demands on the reader with taking care of the reader?
My audience are very intelligent, so I'm not going to spill it. I'm not going to spell it all out for you. If you can't figure it out, I'm not the author for you. The right readers will come to me. I will make demands of the reader sometimes the character got what this other character was implying, but I won't spell out what that character is implying. You get it or you don't, and we're moving on.
So, number 13 question. How many unpublished and half-finished books do you have?
A lot. Let's see. As far as completed manuscripts, I have 4 sort of in the arsenal that will get published eventually. I have 3 that are about to be published. And then I have, as far as half finished, maybe 7 or 8, 9. Something that I could pick up and within a month have it ready to at least self-edit. I've got 8 or 9, I would guess.
Or,
So whenever you learn something new, you want to write about it. And whenever you get this new cool concept, you want to write about it.
yes.
And the middle's the hard part. I think any published author will tell you that. And so if you lose enthusiasm, you lose steam for it, then it's very easy to set it aside, especially if you don't have the discipline as an author to continue writing.
So, what kind of research do you do, and how long do you spend researching before beginning a book?
Research ends up being part of the editing process. I write fiction, for the record. I am not writing nonfiction. If you're writing nonfiction, that's kind of a separate entity when it comes to research. But in my writing fiction, if I let myself go down the research rabbit hole, I don't often come back out. And I waste my entire writing time, my time slot in my schedule, researching this random tangent. So I handwrite everything first. And when I'm handwriting something, if I know I'll need to fact check it later, I'll circle it and keep going. It's like, I think it would take about this long for blah, blah, blah to happen. Then you just circle it, move on, and then when I'm typing it back up later, then I have the opportunity to research. So.
What's the most difficult thing about writing characters from the opposite sex?
I don't really see them as any different. My target audience is male, so most of my main characters are male. Most of what I write is violent, and so hand-to-hand combat is a large part of what makes my brand unique. So gender-wise, there's a little difference in that men have their center of gravity in a different place than women. But besides that, I don't do a lot of romance, so the characters don't end up being terribly different.
How do you select the names of your characters?
That's a difficult one. I have never been good at naming things. One of the things I do for fun is sort of a collaborative storytelling thing where I'm the narrator and a bunch of my friends are the main characters. And so as the narrator, I have to come up with all of the little side characters, and all of them will tell you I suck at naming characters. I've written now 4 books where the main character is never named because I just don't like doing it. The antagonist for this next series I have releasing, her name was literally Avelle because she was evil for the longest time. It was one of those, okay, put in a filler and put it out. I've released 2 very different novels where the main female lead was named Anna because it's a good filler name until I find something. So sometimes it's easier because there are constraints. In one of the series I wrote, the culture was that all of the males had names that start with consonants, and all of the females had names that start with vowels. That at least gave me somewhere to start with. But for the most part, that's one of the most difficult things about writing for me. It's just figuring it out.
If you did not write, what would you do for work?
I am also a sound engineer. So I work at a radio station in my spare time, and they, with using the equipment in exchange for my help with the sound engineering and all the broadcast. So I do some of that.
Do you read your book reviews? How do you deal with bad or good ones?
I have certain people that I trust to give me feedback. My writing club, my editor, definitely. I have beta readers. I have my fight choreographer who helps me with the combat elements. I will read what they have to say because I trust them and I trust their point of view. If it's a random stranger on the internet, their opinion means nothing to me. Sure, go ahead. If you want to comment and hate me, it helps my algorithm either way. It helps me show up in people's searches even if I have bad reviews. So yeah, have fun. Ultimately, if I get feedback that hurts me emotionally, then I sort of have to focus myself and go, okay, why did I write this? Am I really writing selfishly? Does this person's feedback help me tell the story, or is it just pulling me back? And so if I do value their opinion, then I often revise it because that's why I'm asking for their opinion. But if I don't value their opinion, they can pound sand for all I care.
Do you hide any secrets in your book and your books that only a few people will find?
A couple of times. I've also had another member of the writing club hide a little nod in her book to mine, and that was a lot of fun. But I'll do kind of the Stephen King thing where I'll make a mention of something as an offhand comment where if you've read other books, then you know what I'm talking about, but if you haven't, then it's just sort of a random thing. In the series I just finished publishing this last autumn, the main character in the first book is a reporter. And in one of my manuscripts, it's going to be published probably next year sometime. The main character is an actress in a similar town. And so she pretends to be a reporter in order to gain entry into the bad guy's lair. She chooses the name of the reporter from my first series. So if you've read the first series, you know who that is. If you haven't, then it's just she's choosing a name of a random reporter. So I do little nods like that, but I don't try to be too obscure. If you'll get it or you don't, you know.
Yeah. What was your hardest scene to write?
I would have to say the finale for this next series that's coming out. Because I structured the series in a different way, instead of being episodic where each one kind of stands alone, I structured it more like Lord of the Rings, where the whole thing is one story. It's just 3 different chunks of the same story. Because of that, there was a lot of build up to that finale and a lot of weight put on that. And I think I just psyched myself out. I stared at the page for like 2 weeks before getting that scene out. I'm like, okay, it's going to be terrible, and then we'll come back later and fix it, and it actually turned out being really good. So it's, once you get past the mental block of it, then it ends up being a lot easier. 1 second.
Does your family support your career as a writer?
If you ask them, they would definitely say yes. They definitely see the joy that I get out of it, and they want me to continue doing that. But they don't read my writing, so it's one of those, yeah, you do you, and I'm going to stay over here. As an author, I want them to understand my stories and understand this facet of me. So, but they definitely want to see me grow and see me do well as an author.
What other genre do you wish to explore in writing?
I currently bounce back and forth between two different genres in my writing. And one's modern day spy stories, basically, and then the other's fantasy. And I'll hop back and forth depending on my mood and what I'm working on at that particular moment. But if I were to branch into another genre, it would probably be nonfiction. I'm among my writing club, I'm the resident killing people expert because I write action mostly and violence and all of that. Okay, how do I poison my character? Well, what do you want to do with it? And I'll answer their questions. So if I were to go into a completely different genre branch, it would be advice for authors and like a writing resource in that regard.
Do you believe in writer's block?
Yes, and I think anyone who's a disciplined author will tell you that. Any career authors will tell you that. If you don't have writer's block, then you're only writing when you're inspired, and that makes you a hobbyist, not a career author. Which is great if you want to just be a hobbyist and you just want to write when you're inspired. Good, do whatever you want to do. But if you want to buckle down and get serious about your career as an author, you're going to experience writer's block.
What tips can you give to anyone who aspires you to become a writer in the future?
As the saying goes, writers write. So instead of aspiring to become a writer eventually, just start writing. It's going to be good, and then you're going to get better, and you're going to look back and go, no, that's not good. That's just part of the process, part of growing. It'll take a couple of books before you find your own voice as an author. I would suggest, and you'll recognize that moment when you get there, but I would suggest not publishing anything until that moment. And if you want to get to that moment faster, start publishing. One, don't forget there's no timeline on publishing. Do it right, do it well. Two, if you don't know if that has happened yet, it hasn't happened yet. Keep writing selfishly, and you'll get there. And the more selfishly you write, the sooner you'll find that, whatever it is that you truly enjoy to write.
If you are going to write a story about your life, what would be the title of your own book, life story?
My life is so uninteresting. That's why I spend all my time in fantasy land, literally. My life would not make for a good book at all. If I had to write something kind of in that regard, it would probably be my journey as a writer, as in becoming, instead of just being this person with ideas, becoming a career author, and that journey, because I think other people want to experience the same thing. So, but even then, it would probably go back to my motto of write selfishly, because that's the lesson learned in all of it. But yeah, my life in and of itself is not an interesting story. But then I write fiction.
So that's all. Thank you for giving me time to interview you.
Of course. You have fun and write selfishly.
Can you say your name?
Leyes. That's Ley. It's short for Ashley, but I go by Lee. So if you wanted to find any of my books, the Chroma series is the one that just came out. Her Hiding Place is one that it's future dystopian, so that one's a little different. And then I have the Modaku anthologies coming out this summer.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.